Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, 3 bold predictions. We'll call this Bold Predictions Part 1. There's more to come, but I'll give you 3 bold predictions for the Timberwolves this year. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. Hopefully you're having a fantastic week so far. Today on the show, it is Bold Predictions Part 1 for the upcoming season. I'm going to give you 3 things that may be a little hot takey, but I truly believe are realistic. They're bold but realistic predictions. And if you regularly listen to the show, you know I'm not this isn't a hot take show. That's not what we're doing here. These are well thought out, measured opinions. I'm pragmatic with all this stuff, but I'm going to give you the bold but yet realistic. These are things that legit could happen. They're not like, if you ever watch NFL Network bold predictions on Sunday morning, it's like so-and-so is going to rush for 400 yards, like stuff that literally is not going to happen. I don't think one's ever happened. These things could all happen, and I truly believe it. But yet they're not like, you wouldn't get, you'd be looking at plus odds, right? If we're betting on any of this stuff. If any of this stuff was on our friends at FanDuel, the odds would be in the plus territory. We'll say that. So I'll give you 3 today. We're going to do a little bit more of this later in the week, depending on how the week unfolds. But the plan would be on Friday's show to do part 2 of bold predictions. So we'll jump into it today. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked on Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked on Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. Let's jump in. So bold predictions. My first one for you today. Bold predictions for the season for the Timberwolves is that Minnesota will turn out a top 5 offense this year. Now, the reason why I consider this a bold prediction is because the Wolves have basically never had a top 5 offense, and I'm going to be using Cleaning the Glass to measure this. Cleaning the Glass does take out garbage time. It takes out possessions at the end of quarters that are not in close games, so they're heaves, etc. And I think it's better than using the numbers over Basketball Reference, for instance, which I pull a lot of stuff from there. But all this some of these team-based stats I think are best to use Cleaning the Glass. So 2 seasons ago, 23-24, the year where they got the 3 seed, beat Phoenix in the first round, went to the conference finals after beating Denver in 7 and lost to Dallas. Minnesota had the 16th ranked offense in terms of offensive rating on Cleaning the Glass in the NBA. Last season, they finished 8th. If you want to go back further, which is a little pointless because, the roster looks so differently. But if you go back to 22-23, Minnesota was 23rd in offense. And that was the team that was the 8th seed. So that was the first Rudy Gobert season. So 3 years ago, a bad offense. 2 years ago, a mediocre one. Last season, a top 10 offense. So it's clearly ascending. And remember how much flack Chris Finch got a couple years ago. Hey, he's supposed to be an offensive coach, etc. His first year in Minnesota, the year where they were the 6th seed and lost to Memphis in 6 games in the first round, they were actually 7th in offense that year. That was the year before they acquired Rudy Gobert. So Chris Finch's first full year, they were 7th. They went down to like 23rd. They got up to 16th. And then last season, they were up back to 8th. Okay. The reason why I think this is a bold prediction is because because this is a team that has Rudy Gobert, and a lot of people just figure, okay, well, they're going to be defensive minded, right? Like the average national, pundit or the average just general NBA fan that doesn't watch a lot of Wolves is probably thinking, hey, they're Anthony Edwards and they're defensive minded. And yeah, the defense actually did still end up ranked higher league wide than the offense for Minnesota last year. But the reason why I think Minnesota's offense is continuing on the upswing, the first reason is Anthony Edwards continuing to improve, right? That is maybe the most obvious one. Last year, he went from, 2 years ago, above average kind of volume 3-point shooter to just like a the best overall three-point shooter in the league. I'm not saying he's the best pure shooter, but in terms of the combination of volume and efficiency, he shot and made more threes than anyone in the NBA last year and was nearly 40% while doing it. And he shot off the dribble more often than basically anybody, and more often than he shot, catch, and shoot. And he was accurate doing it. So what's he going to add this year? I think he probably gets the line a little bit more. That improved as the year went on last year. But, by the end of the calendar year, when the calendar flipped to 2025 this January, Ant was still not getting the line very often. I think that will happen earlier this year. I think it will be a concerted effort from Ant. He talked a little bit in exit interviews around that time frame about wanting to get in the mid-range more and be really good from the mid-range, which, obviously not the most efficient shot in basketball. In fact, it's the least efficient shot in basketball, but an important tool to have in the toolbox because Ant wasn't good there. He didn't shoot the ball a lot in the mid-range last year, but he wasn't good when he did it. And of course, he had a couple of turnarounds against Denver a couple years in the playoffs. That's when it was like peak. Wait, is this Kobe? Is this MJ? Like it was peak that time frame. And he just shot less of it last year, and it wasn't good when he did. But it's a good thing to be able to do in close late game situations. We know Ant hasn't actually been all that good in clutch situations shooting the ball in terms of his shooting percentage. So what's that improvement going to be? I don't know what the thing will ultimately be for him this year, but I think he will be better. I also think replacing Nickeil Alexander-Walker with some combination of Terrence Shannon Jr. and Rob Dillingham is going to ultimately lift the Wolves offense. Now, that's part of why this is a bold prediction, right? Because Nickeil was a 41% three-point shooter, whatever he was last year. Terrence Shannon Jr. is not. Like, he's more of actually kind of what Ant was a couple years ago, a volume three-point shooter, great range. He's going to shoot it around or probably a little above league average, but he's not as good of a pure, just percentage catch and shoot guy as Nickeil. But he adds that dynamic, that kind of floor bending dynamic where he can shoot the shoot from anywhere, really, at any point. And he'll pull up and shoot a three in transition, etc. And then also Rob Dillingham, who should be, based on what he did in college and in stretches as a pro, as good or better of a shooter as Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He should be better. But both of them are offense-first guys that are more dynamic than Nickeil. And so I think the upside of the Wolves offense is better. Again, I'm not saying the baseline is necessarily better, which is, again, why this is a bold prediction. On its face, you may not be like, all right, the Wolves should be better on offense this year. I think they will be. I think they'll be a top 5 offense, and I think Shannon and Dillingham playing more will have a significant piece to do with that. Another reason why I think the Wolves have a top 5 offense, I think year 2 of Julius Randle inevitably will be better. And we'll talk more about Julius a little bit later in the show. That's a bit of a teaser. But I think Julius Randle will be better this year than he was for the majority of last season. Obviously, he was quite good for a stretch right before he had the injury. And then he was very good in the first couple of rounds of the playoffs before having a tough series, as basically everyone did against OKC in the conference finals. But I think Julius Randle will be better in year 2. And I think that it will help lift the Timberwolves offense. And then the last thing would be, I believe Jaden McDaniels' improvement on the offensive end of the floor is real. I think he's figured out the corner crash thing. I think he's figured out how to make himself available and impactful offensively. He's distributed a little more for others. He's putting the ball on the floor and scoring. I think he's been a little more active in transition. And if that's real and he's still not yet in his prime, that gives Minnesota like a legitimate third option offensively. Like, assuming Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert are both still starting, obviously Gobert is, but assuming everybody, it's the same starting 5 as the last couple of years, like Jaden goes from just the third guy, because you have Ant and you have Randle, and then who else is going to score, to like a real third option. And I think Jaden, we saw it in flashes at times last year. And if that's real, and I think it probably is on some level, then it just adds another dynamic to this offense, and it will help lift it from 8th in the league to top 5. So I believe my first bold prediction here is that Minnesota will have a top 5 offense when it's all said and done here in the 25-26 season. All right, I have 2 more bold predictions for you today. Yes, one involves Julius Randle. We'll get to that one last. The next one will have to do with Minnesota's finish when it's all said and done this season. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here. In fact, it starts tomorrow night with Cowboys and Eagles. And FanDuel is making sure that you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 if your bet. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. We're going to talk a little bit about NBA win totals here in a minute. Minnesota's moved down, by the way, so I have some thoughts on that. But also talking about football season, like the Eagles-Cowboys game, Philly's 8.5-point favorites at home on Thursday night. It's a little bit higher than I would have expected. I believe that line opened a little bit lower. I would think they would be more in the 7.5-point range, but 8.5. If you're going to take Philadelphia, they're laying 8.5 points against Dallas. Look ahead to Sunday and some of the big games, obviously, in the division. The Packers are 2.5-point favorites at home against the Lions. Michael Parsons likely making his debut, and the Vikings are 1.5-point favorites on the road in Chicago, which that feels about right to me. Both those lines actually do. So a lot to look at on FanDuel here upcoming this week at the start of football season. If you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Okay. I am ready to predict where I think, or I'll say it this way. I'm ready for my second bold prediction. I'm not going to give an actual Timberwolves final, like they'll win this many games prediction, but I'm going to get pretty close to that here in this segment because my next bold prediction is that Minnesota will finish the top 3 in the West. Now, if you've been regularly listening to the show over the offseason, you probably don't think that it's that surprising that I would say that because I've said all along, I think Minnesota is a top 4 team in the West this offseason, despite what some of the pundits are saying and some of the things we've covered so far this summer. But I think Minnesota will finish in the top 3 in the Western Conference. And I think OKC finishes with the top seed. I think Minnesota will be 2 or 3. And I'm not sure yet if it's going to be Houston or Denver that finishes ahead of Minnesota. I think one of them will. If I had to pick, I'd pick Denver. And I don't want to turn this into a Houston, an I hate Houston segment because I don't. But I do think that overall, the idea that Houston just like won the offseason has been a little bit blown out of proportion. And I'm not saying they're not going to be good. In fact, I even just allowed for the possibility they could be the 2 seed, Minnesota could be 3. But I think Minnesota will be a top 3 seed. And in my hesitation with Houston, and actually let me hit the win totals first. Houston right now, their win total at FanDuel is 56.5. Okay. I would take the under and feel okay about taking the under on Houston at 56.5 wins. Denver, by the way, is 53.5, a little higher than I would have expected. And Minnesota is down to 49.5 for their win total. They opened at 50.5 wins when I think it was early July when these lines came out. And I don't really get it. Here's the thing. First for Minnesota. Minnesota won 49 games last year. And this is a little bit related to what I did, I guess, even yesterday. Well, no, I guess this would have been Friday's show, and I made the case for why they'll take a leap this year. To think that, like, obviously you could take the under and have them tread water and win 49 games again, right? Like, you could still be right if you take the under at 49.5 and they win the same number of games they did last year. But I don't understand making the under because if you're taking the under, if you're doing that, here's what you're saying. You're saying by taking the under on 49.5 that losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a bigger deal than whatever Anthony Edwards' improvement is going to be. And if that's the case, then why do we think Anthony Edwards is who we all think he is, right? Like if he's not going to improve as a player, and like what else changed other than Rudy and Mike Conley being a year older? Because here's the thing, Ant's a year older. And again, I think Ant's improvement, as we've seen year over year over the past 3+ years or so, since he really started beginning to get to the star and then superstar caliber level, and also throw in Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid and these guys who are entering the prime of their careers or getting closer to them, that their improvement will be outweighed by the loss of Nickeil and regression, or I should say decline, from Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley. Like, what else changed? Nothing else changed. And it's possible they have worse injury luck, but they also could have better injury luck. They had Randle, Gobert, and DiVincenzo all miss a month of the season last year due to injury. And Karl-Anthony Towns was traded right before training camp. It's pretty unlikely that they trade Julius Randle or another, key cog in their rotation right before training camp again. So I don't understand taking the under on that. And the Houston thing, Houston had a good offseason. I'm not going to argue that at all. I mean, like, anytime you can add a guy like Kevin Durant, it's obviously a good offseason. I'm not arguing that they didn't. And I know that they had a good year last year in terms of how many games that they won. And they were the 2 seed in the West, right? But they easily could have been the 6 seed. They easily could have been where Minnesota was, right? For much of the season. Like, this thing came down to the final week or so where each team was seated. So adding Kevin Durant matters. Adding Dorian Finney-Smith is great. I don't know that that does much more than, I think it does. I think he's a better player in a vacuum than Dillon Brooks. But I think moving on from Dillon Brooks, as obnoxious as he is, because he is obnoxious, there's something there too. Like, from a locker room standpoint, from a toughness on the floor standpoint, and also he's a good player. And I think, again, in a vacuum, Finney-Smith is better. But it's not as much of a lift because you're losing Dillon Brooks. And then Kevin Durant and Clint Capella is a depth piece. And obviously they brought back a bunch of guys on extensions, et cetera. And I like a lot of those guys. I like Jabari Smith. I like Jayshawn Tate. Jabari Smith, I think, is getting overpaid, but they kind of had to do it. I like Steven Adams a lot. I like Jayshawn Tate a lot. I like Fred VanVleet a lot. They extended him. So this is obviously a good team. I'm not here to argue that they're going to be worse this year than they were last year. But Kevin Durant had the worst season of his career last season, and it's not really all that close. Across the board, like, what are we expecting? He's 37. He tore his Achilles, 6-7 years ago? Like, across the board. I mean, assist rate was the lowest since 2010, 2011. Rebound rate, which, you're not really looking for that to be significant at this point, but, playing in the front court a lot more in Phoenix, his total rebound rate was the lowest since his rookie season. The offensive rebound rate, which matters for easy buckets, et cetera, the lowest of his career. Defensively, the block rate, the last couple of years has been below where it was in his prime in Golden State and in latter years in OKC. I said assist rate already, total rebound rate, the free throw rate. Free throw rate was higher last year than it was the year before in Phoenix, but those are the 2 lowest years of his entire career in terms of free throw rate. He's not getting to the rim anymore. So he's going to lift their offense because they needed some more shooting. That was one of their weaknesses last year. Houston's was consistent outside shooting, and he's going to add a lift there for sure. And the 3-point percentage is obviously still great. But I don't buy that it's going to be this like massive lift because we're still talking about a 37-year-old that clearly was starting to slip last year. I mean, where was Phoenix in the playoffs? I know obviously they have other problems and Houston's got a better roster, but if you're banking on him to be that guy, of course they have Şengün, there's other guys on this team, but I just think we've gotten a bit ahead of what Kevin Durant's going to provide at this stage in his career. And they very well could be a 2, 3, or 4 seed in the West, but let's not put them in pen, in ink at number 2 in the West. I think it's OKC. And then some combination of Denver, Minnesota, and Houston. And my prediction is that Minnesota ends up in the top 3 and either Denver or Houston is in the 4 spot. And in some order, those are your top 4 getting home court in the first round of the playoffs. That's how I think this shakes out. And right now, I would go OKC, Denver. I love Denver's offseason, by the way. I think Denver did an awesome job after really doing a terrible job a couple of years before. But I mean, like, Cam Johnson replacing Michael Porter Jr., I think he's actually a better fit, and I know they won with Michael Porter Jr., but I like Cam Johnson's fit. Jonas Valanciunas replacing Dario Saric, that is, obviously he's a better player. Valanciunas is a better player than Saric. And then Bruce Brown coming back to Denver, obviously not in the same role, not quite the same player he was a few years ago. And then Tim Hardaway Jr., who I've always been a little lower on. I think he's a nice kind of depth piece, volume scorer off the bench. But still, that's depth, right? Like, you need that. And Denver didn't have that the last couple of years. So I love Denver's offseason. Right now, I'd go OKC, Denver, Minnesota, Houston. That's how I see the Western Conference sitting here in very early September. All right, let's close today by getting to my last Julius Randle related prediction. That's how we'll close the show here today. All right. 12 months ago, Julius Randle was still not on the Minnesota Timberwolves. Think about that. It's a crazy thing to think about. We are still not a year away from, or a year removed from, the Karl-Anthony Towns trade. It feels like Karl-Anthony Towns hasn't been on the Wolves in like 2 years. And in reality, it's only been 11 months. Julius Randle joined Minnesota on the eve of training camp along with Dante DiVincenzo. And Randle got off to a little bit of a slow start, a rocky start. The scoring was there, but the efficiency wasn't. The turnovers were an issue. Obviously, opening night in LA was bad. He had the game winner against Phoenix in, I think, early November, which was a huge moment. And then there was some rocky times after that. It picked up in a good way after the first of the year in January. And then he ends up with the injury. End of the regular season, a bit of a bit slower for him. Really good first 2 rounds of the playoffs, like to the point where like the national podcasts were like, whoa, is, Julius Randle, can he be the second best player on a title team? Like that sort of a conversation was a real conversation. And then, of course, he kind of was really bad against OKC, not the only one. And they needed him to be great against OKC, and that did not happen. So my prediction for this season for Julius Randle, this is probably my boldest of the 3 for today, that Julius Randle will be an all-star again in 2025-26, which would give him 3 all-star appearances in 4 years and 4 total for his career, 4 and 6, actually, going back to his second season in New York in 2021. Here's the case. The easiest way to say this is as follows. I think Minnesota will be one of the best couple of teams in the West at the All-Star break. And it's very rare that you have a team that's best or second best even in a conference at the All-Star break that only has one All-Star. And nobody else on the Wolves is likely to be an All-Star this year. I'd be shocked if Rudy Gobert made an All-Star team at this point. I don't think it's going to be Jaden McDaniels. I just think from a scoring opportunity standpoint and the way that these things are picked, Julius Randle is going to have a better shot than Jaden McDaniels at winning an all-star nod. So I think math would tell you, if you believe the Wolves are going to be good, and I believe they will, I think they'll be an easy over on that 49.5 number. If they're in a great spot at the break, I mean, Julius Randle is the obvious pick. And then, of course, it goes to the actual like application. How does that happen? Well, last year he averaged 19 a game. It was his least points per game since his last year in the Lakers, which is crazy to think about. It's been since 2018 that he averaged under 19 points per game. But the volume simply wasn't quite there. It was also the least amount of minutes he's played since his Pelicans season in 2018-19. And he also, in terms of games, we talked about how much time he missed. I mean, he missed 13 games with injury. The rebounding wasn't quite as good either, and I think that's probably my biggest concern because it was like a career low in points in rebounds per game. It was a career low, and in terms of his actual rebound rate, it was as well. So but what I think we'll see is, first of all, he'll be more comfortable year 2 in Minnesota. He knows he's very likely in Minnesota now for at least the next couple of seasons. Remember, he signed the new contract this offseason. So he knows he'll be in Minnesota longer term. I think he's going to get more opportunities with the ball in his hands, in part due to Mike Conley aging and not having a real backup point guard. Chris Finch talks about all the time how he loves Julius Randle initiating offense. He loves him as a point forward. He did it when he was with them in New Orleans. I think that's something we're going to see more of from Julius Randle this year. His assist rate last season was in line with where it was with the Knicks. And, one of the higher assist rate years of his career. It was also one of the higher turnover rate years of his career. I think part of that was dealing with new personnel, getting familiar with it, etc. The usage rate was also down. So not only were the minutes down, but the usage rate was down, which of course is going to lead to only scoring 18.7 points per game. And the 3-point shot was where you'd want it to be. It was actually tied for the second best 3-point shooting season of his career in terms of percentage. So again, I think the opportunity will still be there. Clearly, I think he'll have the ball in his hands even more, initiating more offense, and he'll be more comfortable from day one. And again, if you believe Ant's going to be really, really good this year and continue to improve, not just really, really good, but continue his ascension, then I think it's going to lift all ships, right? And I think Julius Randle is the most likely ship to be lifted because he's going to benefit from that. He's going to benefit from the Ant's attention. He's going to punish mismatches, which we saw him finally do in the latter part of last season and early in the playoffs. We're going to see more of that this season. I think the opportunity will be there. The comfort level will be there. The ball will be in his hands that much more often. And that's going to lend itself to big numbers for Julius Randle. And they may not be, 25 and 10 like he put up in New York when he was third team All-NBA 3 years ago. They may not be 24 and 10 like he put up the first time in New York when he was most improved player and second team All-NBA in 2021. But I think they'll be all-star caliber. I think they'll be in the 20-10 range. I think instead of the 19-7 he put up this year, I think we're talking 20, 21, and 9 or 10, maybe 21 and 9, we'll call it. And that may be enough on a top 2 or 3 team in the Western Conference at the All-Star break to earn another All-Star berth, which again would be his third in 4 years and fourth in 6 seasons, fourth overall for his career for Julius Randle. I think it's entirely on the table this year, and that is my final bold prediction of today's show. I'll be back on Friday, and we'll likely do part 2 of bold predictions. I mentioned the ESPN. Nope, I mentioned the ESPN. Not ESPN. I mentioned the Locked On NBA top 100 players list, and anticipated that being released today. We're actually pushing it to next week. So on Monday, we'll do a show about the top 100 here at Locked On NBA, and I'll give you kind of the breakdown of that, and then we'll compare and contrast that against my list that I submitted. I have my list of top 100 players, and where was I right? Where was I wrong? Where were my colleagues right and wrong as well? I think that'll be a lot of fun. The sneak preview I saw definitely had Rudy Gobert a handful. It was actually pretty close to where I had him, but 5, 6, 7 spots lower than where I had him ranked. So we'll do that next week. And then here in just a couple of weeks, we'll be back to 5 shows per week. We're like 3 weeks away from training camp. It's getting real. We are almost there. Lots more fun offseason stuff upcoming. Likely have some guests on here soon to help me with some predictions for the season. So all that is upcoming here in the coming weeks. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder that you can listen to Locked On NBA or watch Locked On NBA. You can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. You can watch on YouTube. Our guys, Doug, Matt, and Hayes, will keep you updated and informed all offseason long. Only a few weeks left in this offseason. Again, watch on YouTube, listen wherever. And of course, Locked On NBA podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just like this show, of course, the Locked On Network is also your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.